Please be seated.
Everyone, and welcome. I was told that I would have to tell everyone to be seated, but that's now taken away from me. You are all seated and very, very welcome to this inaugural lecture of Professor Catherine de Toit, a true champion of language and literature, and someone who it has been my privilege to know for a good number of years. So welcome, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, students, honored guests. I don't know all of you. I did pop into a fellow dean at the as we were mingling. And I do want to recognize Professor Monwabisi Khala, also because he is a fellow colleague here at the Department of African Languages and now Dean of Humanities at the University of the Western Cape. So thank you very much for joining us tonight, Monwabisi. But we're here to listen to the inaugural professorial talk or lecture. This is supposed to be for a broad audience, but it's still a sharing of Catherine's journey, which has taken place over a long and very illustrious academic career. I think her achievements as a professor of French, the first woman full professor of French in the country, her dedication to the French language, but also to language as such, to French literature and its education, the teaching thereof, has been a cornerstone here at our university and at the faculty for many years. And tonight we mark that and we celebrate it. Catherine's passion for French extends far beyond the classroom and teaching. Her research has delved into the rich tapestry of French literature, but with a particular focus on the life and works of Henri-Pierre Rocher. She's not only enlightened us with her own insights, but she's empowered numerous students over many years through exceptional supervision and teaching, guiding them to achieve academic excellence. And that commitment is evident in the success stories of her students, her postgraduate students, and the PhD dissertations which she supervised and overseen. That influence has been recognized outside of our own borders, and her expertise has been valued by the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie and other academic associations. She's a champion for the integration of literature into foreign language learning, ensuring that students not only grasp the language, but also appreciate the cultural richness with which it comes along. And I'm sure that all of us who have tried to learn a foreign language will appreciate that. Catherine is a true multilingualist. One of the things that I learned from her is the phrase, The limits of my world are determined by the limits of my language. And I've paraphrased it here with apologies, Catherine. How true that is. Language is a path to somebody else's world, to somebody else's heart. Translation of literature has also been a passion of hers. She's translated the work of, among others, Breiten Breitenbach, Marleen van Niekerk, Ryk Hatton, Arthur Rimbaud, and Michel Houellebecq. But then there are also 10 translations of books on wine and viticulture. Good on you, Catherine. Catherine has received the highest honor from France that can be bestowed upon a foreign academic that teaches the language. The Ordre des Arts et des Lettres, which was awarded to her by the French government, and I quote, for her significant contribution to the enrichment of the French cultural inheritance, which makes her a knight in this order, by the way, une chevalier? No, bon. Professor du Toit's leadership extends beyond academic research and teaching. And this is where I got to know her very well. She's been the chair of the Department of Modern Foreign Languages for as long as I can remember. Successfully presiding over a department which consists of a French section, a German section, and of late a Chinese Mandarin section. Not an easy task. But I really got to know her when she was Vice Dean for Research in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. While at the same time, I should add, she was chair of the department. She remained chair of the department. Catherine is passionate about academic leadership, dare I say academic management, don't shoot me for it, but that encompasses academic management with empathy. She has made major contributions to our faculty, but also to the institution with regard to staff wellness. I had the privilege of working with her in the Dean's office during a time when our faculty was going through a very challenging period. And there I experienced her as a critical loyalist, a colleague, and most importantly, a friend. Tonight, Catherine, we acknowledge your contributions, your dedication, your mentorship, and your cultural understanding, which has had a significant impact on our faculty and our university and other universities and communities, academic communities beyond. Undoubtedly, your influence will continue to inspire and empower future generations of students and colleagues. Professor du Toit, please join us now on stage to present your talk on crime fiction in a period of consequence, climate change, and the limits/limitations of literature. Thank you.
Bonsoir, goedenavond, good evening. Je demande pardon aux collègues et aux amis francophones et à mes étudiants de ne pas faire le discours de ce soir en français. Il nous reste du travail à faire. Ik vra om verskoning dat my lesing vir vanaand in Engels aangebied word, terwille van my vreemde tale vriende en collega's kan dit nie anders nie. Ek dra hierdie lesing graag op aan my pa, Heinrich de Vilvoorde de Toit, wat vanaand graag hier sou wou wees. I realize that it's much easier to listen to something if you know exactly how long it's going to be. Jonathan Dale told me that it would be okay. My lecture is 55 minutes, so then you know that you can count the time and count the minutes as we go along. From an inaugural lecture at my age, one may expect the wisdom of years and experience to be delivered with glowing confidence. In reality, I increasingly find myself lacking answers, interrogating perceived knowledge, and establishing how much I still need to read and learn. What I present today forms part of an earnest and ongoing quest to find meaning and validity in my research and teaching, to the extent that they transcend my individual academic identity and offer keys to understanding, a way to new knowledge, and the moral courage to add action to conviction. Different from a standard academic lecture, some perspectives will, I hope, provide personal context and intellectual texture. What is the point of literature? My decision to pursue postgraduate studies in French literature after an undergraduate degree in law was not taken lightly. At the time, we were, after all, about to build a new country. Was it not an unjustifiable luxury to study something that brought me deep pleasure, but appeared not to have any practical use? This thought continued to nag away at me even as we worked with texts and notions in our French lectures that were so complex, so intensely thought-provoking, stretching so deep into human history and the mysteries of poetics and creation that my teeming brain was spiking neurons at an alarming rate. We were expected not to reproduce learning or knowledge from books, but to think for ourselves. Ready-made theories are clearly anathema to this approach to literature, since they risk reducing a creative work to a closed system that may only serve to tick the boxes of another's reductive framework. Learning to think for yourself is hard work. It presupposes a solid foundation of knowledge acquired through living, listening, questioning, discussing, thinking, and reading texts in several languages. Simply reflecting knowledge from external sources is redundant, even if you compare, consider, and criticize them. Today, such a compilation can easily be replaced by an artificial intelligence program. Independent thought creates knowledge shaped by personal conviction and insight, integrated into a living and growing harmonic whole. The research that results from it may not follow intellectual trends or scholarly prescriptions, but it will have its own coherence, decisive and convincing, through its authenticity and the will to act. Gradually, I understood that this approach to studying literature was not about teaching what to know or think. It was about learning how to think independently. Knowing and understanding the relevant texts was taken for granted. Secondary texts were firmly dismissed as secondary. And of course, all this learning took place in French. Coming to grips with literature in a foreign language automatically adds the dimension of thinking of language more directly. Language is, as we know, a double-edged sword. It allows us to create a narrative of our own experience and share it with others. At the same time, it drives a wedge between our personal experience and our thoughts and their verbal representation. As soon as we start, as children, to communicate with others, we are obliged to reduce our expression to the words that exist in a given language. The loss that ensues is even greater if our expression is reduced to a single language. Literature can fill this ontological gap. I learned that words are never simply signs in service of communication. In literature, they are revealed as the intimate, personal, and fundamental building blocks of expressing thought and representing being. Words are utterances, and therefore breath, rhythm like the pulse of a heartbeat. Repeating the words of a poet, you breathe life into the being that they were, their presence on the planet. Understanding this responsibility gives one a different perspective on language as more than packaging for trading thoughts and things, with a singular respect for words. Writing about the Inkling of Oxford, translator Eugene Terekin comments, language is not a communication tool, but rather a portal into being, an invisible reality summoned into our world by the very shape and sound of words. Properly speaking, words are incantations. This idea is beautifully expressed in a sonnet by the poet Stéphane Mallarmé. Pour revivre, il suffit qu'à tes lèvres j'emprunte le souffle de mon nom murmuré tout un soir. As I teach French as a foreign language to students and delve with them into texts that they may at first experience as an impenetrable and confusing forest, I hope to guide them in an understanding of what language is and of the sharp skills required to unlock all the meaning of a literary text. If they master those skills, they can interpret any text, be it literary, legal, philosophical, political, or even scientific. Literature may doubt itself today, having entered, as François Compagnon says, into an era of suspicion, l'ère du soupçon. This self-doubt is increased by a general inferiority complex of the human sciences, as disciplines try to make themselves appear more relevant by imitating others and superficially adopting the jargon and processes of the pure sciences. Sadly, these approaches may sacrifice the raison d'être of the disciplines in question and turn them into diluted hogswool, neither fish nor fowl. This does not mean that literature should ignore the world or limit itself to a pleasurable distraction, but rather that it will avoid devaluation and irrelevance by focusing on its own strengths. Literary texts offer the rare possibility of capturing and transmitting the experience and the being of others, regardless of their culture, language, or the time in which they lived, and to allow the reader to identify with their thoughts and destiny. Literature may also reveal to readers entirely imagined realms, beings, and even languages. This shapes the character of a human being capable of compassion, understanding, insight, imagination, the interpretation of actions, and an awareness of others and otherness. It should also deepen and enhance the understanding of human communication, particularly the numerous ways in which literature bridges the gap between being and verbal expression. In other words, the ability to understand and interpret what is not stated explicitly in the text, ranging from historical context, irony, double entente, symbolism, or intertextuality, to tone, rhythm, sound, absence, and silence. Students, and people in general, seem to find it increasingly difficult to deal with meaning that is not immediately apparent. This sometimes leads to excruciating misunderstandings and accusations of inaccuracy, insensitivity, or even offensiveness. Between what I learned and what I teach about thinking for oneself, language, and the broader values of literature, I know now that my work can contribute to the invisible but essential backbone, that the human sciences constitute in any society. But how can I apply this practically? When it comes to determining research subjects, it's dry up here, we enjoy great freedom. The years I spent researching the works and long life of Henri Pierre Rocher, as the Dean said, took me down many different avenues in culture, the history of ideas and literature in the 20th century. With my work on Michel Houellebecq, I explored the extrême contemporain in French literature and the darkness of contemporary individualism and materialism. Alain Resnais opened new perspectives on cinema, time, memory, and forgetting. Apart from this kind of research on specific authors, I learned that I could harness research to the need for a deeper knowledge of things that scared, bothered, or intrigued me. This led to research about the literary expressions of aging and dementia in 21st century literature, animal studies, the mystery of the female orgasm, and various topics involving crime fiction. I've always enjoyed reading crime fiction. As the popularity of the genre exploded in Africa some decades ago, I decided it would be worth investigating how one could bridge the linguistic divide by studying themes in Francophone and Anglophone crime fiction novels. The scholarly study of crime fiction was still relatively new when I embarked on this branch of research. Today, I no longer need to justify this interest. It is no longer regarded as a questionable subgenre written according to a formula and read only for the purposes of entertainment. Critical works on crime fiction now abound, and a number of academic journals are dedicated to the genre. Among the themes I studied in my earlier works, I included the conflict in African crime fiction as it reflects the reality of the post-colonial situation, the tension that exists between a pragmatic adherence to a legal system largely inherited from the colonial regimes and adapted to a greater or lesser extent, and the preservation of secular traditions that involve their own hierarchy, belief systems, and perceptions of justice that may not necessarily be shared by all generations or groups. With this, I hope to have explained the trajectory that brought me to this evening's discussion on crime fiction in a period of consequence. This expression is, of course, borrowed from Al Gore's 2006 documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, in which he stresses the urgent moral imperative of action with regard to climate change. The era of procrastination, of half measures, of soothing and baffling expedients, of delays is coming to a close. In its place, we are entering a period of consequence. I consider climate change the single most important challenge that faces humankind today. Since I'm sharing my personal itinerary and research this evening, I can reveal that this concern too is anchored in a long history with some genetic predispositions. Earlier this year, in an interview for Martis FM, journalist Susanne Boyens remembered my environmental concerns from a school camp where I campaigned against aerosol deodorants. But the history goes back even further. In 1913, my paternal grandfather published a pioneering work on dry farming, in which he advocated for reasoned agricultural practices that would take into account limited and uncertain water resources, soil conservation, and the planting of indigenous grains and vegetation. He writes, "If we look properly at human history, we realize that man has always been dependent on the rest of the living world, and that his progress and numerical increase have essentially depended upon the cultivation of other forms of life." His thinking may have been visionary. It also led him to create and run several experimental farms and launch agricultural education initiatives. Stellenbosch University did recognize his prescience and efforts through the award of an honorary master's degree. As a child, I learned the true value of water from my maternal grandparents on their farm in the Bushmanland. My mother was 7 when she saw rain for the first time. She was extremely upset with whoever was wasting such a lot of water. This image shows my maternal grandfather digging to determine the penetration depth of a rare summer rainfall. These personal narratives may explain why I was particularly receptive from an early age to the idea that we as humans are accountable for our stewardship of the earth. In the early 1980s, astrophysicist Carl Sagan's television series Cosmos was a clear revelation to me of perspective. Explaining the direct impact of human activities on the planet's ecosystem and climate, Sagan says, "How would we explain all this to a dispassionate extraterrestrial observer? Who speaks for the human species? Who speaks for Earth?" From an extraterrestrial perspective, our global civilization is clearly on the edge of failure, and the most important task it faces, preserving the lives and well-being of its citizens and the future habitability of the planet. In 1985, Carl Sagan testified before the United States Congress about anthropogenic climate change, in scientific terms that make the causes and the actions to be taken extremely clear. This was nearly 40 years ago. In the interim, there have been many task forces, committees, commissions, summits, reports, strategies, policies, plans, and laws. Leading scientists across the globe are intensively involved in climate change-related research, and findings are continually communicated. General public awareness of climate change, its causes and consequences have taken firm root. And yet, in South Africa, for instance, anthropogenic climate change is entirely absent from the school curricula. Despite historical records that trace the insulating effect of gases in the Earth's atmosphere back to Joseph Fourier's 1924 findings, with subsequent verification, refinement, and expansion by scientists all over the world, reaching a rare degree of scientific consensus today, misinformation campaigns regularly reappear, along with countless conspiracy theories. There are also more prominent skeptics and detractors like Judith Curry, whose arguments appear to be carried by a conflation of truths around academic funding and exclusive normativity in academia, and scientific uncertainties. Most importantly, policymakers and politicians in many countries still appear to rely on general public indifference when it comes to honouring their commitment, for instance, to limiting greenhouse gas emissions. The scale of change required to address the crisis is daunting, and most politicians are only interested in doing visible things that will benefit their popularity during their time in office, sometimes even just during the weeks leading to an election. In countries like South Africa, much is made on a political level of the successful securing of funding for climate-related projects. But having the money is not quite the same as making a successful contribution to limit the effects of anthropogenic climate change. For instance, a recent analysis by scholars from WITS of the Just Energy Transition Grant funding of between 8.5 and 10 billion rand secured in 2021 indicates that the bulk of the funding is not used in a way that will effectively mitigate climate change or help adaptation. From what we have seen so far, they write, there is little reason to be hopeful. On the one hand, there is overwhelming and critical scientific evidence of the urgent need for transformative action to mitigate anthropogenic climate change. Visible and widely reported manifestations like the intensive heat waves in the 2023-2024 summer, there, Jonathan Dale, globally, the frequency of extreme weather events and the record average global sea surface temperatures of recent months should make the urgency clear. On the other hand, inaction and inefficiency are driven by political skepticism, indecision and fear-mongering, economic interests and attachment to comfort, the inability to recognize the Earth as a single organism, pragmatism and bureaucracy. This is where it may be possible for literature to make a difference. Alain Mabongo writes the following in a short text. L'adhésion, n'est-ce pas le mot qui est utilisé lorsqu'il faut évoquer la communauté européenne? Que vaut une entreprise humaine si elle n'est pas fondée sur une idée commune, une idée partagée ou à partager, une résolution de regarder le futur avec un peu plus d'humanité, d'échange? Literature may be able to supplement scientific reports about the climate change crisis in order to facilitate exactly such an adherence. Climate fiction, often shortened to cli-fi, that takes the scientific paradigm of anthropogenic climate change as a point of departure, has existed at least since the 1970s and is growing in stature. With some books garnering literary prizes, well-known authors who can be mentioned are Margaret Atwood, Barbara Kingsolver, Ian McEwan, Ilya Troyanov, and Maya Lunde. If it is indeed possible for literature to swing popular awareness and inspire action, would it not make sense to harness climate change action advocacy to the most popular global fiction genre, which is crime fiction, according to the most recent statistics? The question behind my initial inquiry was whether this has been done, and done in a way that has the potential to inspire action. The failure of the COP24 climate talks in December 2018 to decide on urgent collective actions that would limit climate change moved the doyen of French crime writers, Fred Vargas, to suspend a literary activity in order to dedicate her energy and research skills to an information campaign about climate change. Pour le moment, au vu de la situation, écrire un roman policier me paraît dérisoire. J'ai du mal à m'intéresser à qui a tué qui. Dans l'humanité en péril, je ne raconte pas un crime, mais le plus grand crime qui ait jamais été perpétré. Convinced, at least at an earlier stage, that public inaction and apathy regarding the global crisis could be ascribed to a lack of comprehensive information, and now I'm getting too hot under this robe, speaking about warming. So, she speaks of the willful suppression and misdirection of information by political and industrial leaders. And she set about writing an essay after several months of arduous research. L'Humanité en péril, the book that resulted, starts with a diatribe against political and economic power, clearly drawing the lines between us and them. She then continues to describe the complexity of climate change, providing detailed information about the human activities that favor or produce greenhouse gases, followed by an equally detailed analysis of the depletion of other natural resources, particularly potable water, showing the interconnectedness of climate change and the management of resources necessary for sustainable survival. In addition to a long list of urgent measures intended for policymakers, Vargas also presents practical solutions for everyday actions that she claims will make a difference. There's no clear chapter division, which makes the book a little difficult to navigate, but at the same time, this aspect is an illustration of the vast systemic knowledge required to apprehend the interrelation and causal links between the societal, environmental, and economic factors that underpin the complexity of climate change. After L'Humanité en péril, virons de bord toutes, in 2019, Vargas brought out a second essay, Quelle chaleur allons-nous connaître? Quelles solutions pour nous nourrir, in 2022, in which she pursues the discussion of the depletion of natural resources, the resulting collapse of infrastructure and economies, and alternative agricultural methods. In both books, Vargas insists on the urgent need for positive collective action. In a division of societal reaction to the climate crisis, she describes herself as an espérantiste, so someone who remains hopeful, clearly drawing a line between those who continue to hope against hope and the denialists, the survivalists, the collapsologists, or the doomerists. In May 2023, Vargas published a new crime fiction novel, Sur la dalle, translatable as Rock Bottom, in which her defective detective, Commissaire Adamsberg, travels to a small town in Brittany to solve a series of crimes that are steeped in history, literature, legends, and local ghost stories. The text does contain scattered references to, oops, I think I must go back, no, wait, there we are. Scattered references to climate change, but the novel is essentially an Adamsberg mystery. What does this return to crime fiction mean in the case of Vargas? Naturally, one ages in 6 years, with a pandemic thrown into boot. The sword wears out the sheath, and the soul wears out the breast. But it is difficult not to see signs of defeat, both in her body language and in the shift from a dynamic activist tone. I think I must go there, yeah. To one of pensive resignation. I would like to use this slice from the life of Fred Vargas as a springboard to reflect on the potential of literature to make a difference in the face of what the UN calls the defining nature, the defining crisis of our times. The term crisis is used in a wide range of fields, and it stands to reason that no single definition can cover all the meanings. The ambiguity of the term itself, originally as a decisive turning point in an illness, the moment when fever reaches its highest level, but it doesn't make it easier to settle on a definition. We can, however, isolate certain terms or criteria that frequently overlap in various definitions of a crisis. For example, the UN defines a humanitarian crisis as an event or series of events that represent a critical threat to the health, safety, security, or well-being of a community or other large groups of people. Another common conception is that crises present an extraordinary and extreme situation that disrupts and destabilizes that which is normal and expected. The threat posed by a crisis is such that it requires immediate action immediate attention in the form of action, treatment, decision, interaction, and intervention. However, the impact of a crisis may induce fear or a sense of being overwhelmed, which may in turn paralyze the ability to act or to access the necessary coping mechanisms. A crisis cannot be resolved by customary problem-solving resources or skills. From this, it is clear how a crisis differs from a problem, an issue, an emergency, or a disaster. The fact that resolution is urgently required does not mean that a solution to the crisis exists, or that it is, in fact, feasible. In a sense, therefore, there is an inherent disjunction between the crime genre, where solving or attempting to solve a mystery shapes meaning in the narrative, and the notion of crisis, where solutions, answers, and closure are per definition uncertain. Many climate fiction novels deal with violence and suggest that anthropogenic climate change constitutes a crime against humanity. The notion of crime is therefore present in these climate fiction novels. However, these narratives are not typically accompanied by any form of investigation or problem solving and can therefore not double up as crime fiction. I discovered that there are in fact not yet many literary texts that integrate both these genres. Crime novels that interrogate more general issues of environmental transgressions and ecological impact have been around for a longer time and have been variously classified as environmental crime fiction, eco-noirs, or eco-thrillers. The climate change crisis was imagined in literature long before it became scientific reality, categorized as a genre of fiction writing. Climate fiction very often represents a speculative, futuristic vision of climate change. In its early manifestations, such as the eco-thriller film Soylent Green, based on the 1966 novel Make Room by Harry Harrison, it was after all viewed as a subset of science fiction. The dystopian, futuristic, fictional worlds of these texts either portray the disastrous consequences of climate change, apocalyptic storms, floods, droughts, disease, etc., or focus on the resulting collapse. Sorry. So I was busy speaking about the eco-thriller film that you may know, Soylent Green, which was based on the 1966 novel Make Room by Harry Harrison, and about the fact that climate change was also seen as a subset of science fiction. These dystopian, futuristic, fictional worlds of these kinds of climate fiction texts either portray the disastrous consequences of climate change, apocalyptic storms, floods, droughts, disease, or focus on the resulting collapse of society, harsh conditions, and extreme coping mechanisms. It has been suggested that decisive action in policy and robust measures to counter climate change are so rare because the truly calamitous results will only become clear in the future. This, in spite of the massive evidence of climate change happening right now all over the planet with quiet insistence, as Amita Ghosh describes it in his book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable. Perhaps authors simply feel that contemporary manifestations of anthropogenic climate change are not as convincing or dramatic a context as its possible apocalyptic consequences. Dynamics are very different in an apocalyptic or post-apocalyptic setting, focusing the plot and action on the human activities of coping, adapting, and surviving, rather than on the causal relationship between human activity and environmental devastation. There are indeed a number of crime novels with futuristic climate change scenarios. The action and the investigation typically center around violence and violations that form part of adaptation or survival strategies in a hostile environment. This is the case, for example, in The Healer by Antti Tuomainen and Mère by Bertil Scali and Raphael Dandrèche. After discarding these and similar books to focus on novels that deal with crime and climate change as interconnected and set in the world as we know it, that is, focused on current or foreseeable manifestations of climate change, I was left with only a few novels that deal with events that are real or with high-impact climate change scenarios that align with probability rather than speculation. I shall briefly describe their intrigue before speaking about impact in more detail. Ordnin, let's just get the right way around. It translates as desolation, but the English title of this novel by Icelandic author Yrsa Sigurdardóttir is The Day is Dark. The main investigator is an advocate, Tora Gudmundsdóttir. She's commissioned to travel to Greenland with her partner Matthias to investigate the mysterious disappearance of several employees of a mining company which may face bankruptcy if they don't return to their work. The investigation leads them to an old local Inuit story embroidered with taboos and legends of evil spirits. The legends center around a forbidden place, a cave, where in a forgotten past, people killed by a curse had been buried. The bodies are never decomposed under the permafrost, but were laid bare under the melting of the ice layer. The graves were desecrated by opportunistic Icelandic mine workers who were in their turn cursed by the reawakened Spanish flu virus that had decimated a community nearly 100 years earlier. Blaashoek is a peaceful village where the seasons used to merge smoothly and people live together in solidarity. This is a Belgian book. The wind does blow, which is why large wind turbines are being installed. The energy generators are welcome to the big party, and at first they seem to bring only benefits, until butcher Herman Brakke can no longer sleep. He hears the turbines humming, and this prevents him from sleeping properly in an intensely hot summer. His lack of sleep leads to a misadventure with his popular terrine when he falls asleep with his face in the meat, and so unintentionally poisons half the village. Secrets are revealed, murders are committed, and all can be traced back to the wind turbines and to the extraordinary summer heat. Several recent studies point to a clear connection between extraordinary heat and criminal activity. The anthropogenic climate change has numerous adverse health effects, such as heat-related morbidity and mortality, respiratory diseases from wildfire smoke, the rise of prevailing and novel vector-borne and waterborne infectious diseases following a drought or flood, and death or injury due to storms or flooding. However, the potential effect of high temperatures on increased interpersonal violence in the context of climate change has received much less attention. A growing body of research suggests that rising temperature increases some violent crimes, such as intentional homicides, sex offenses, and assaults. Heat and its disastrous consequences for water and therefore for life also constitute the framework of 42 Grad by Wolf Harlander. In this 2020 eco-thriller, Germany is enjoying the summer of the century with weeks of bright sunshine and the best barbecue and swimming weather, until the water runs out and remains scarce. Lakes dry up, rivers silt up, and the groundwater level drops. Soon after, not a drop comes out of the tap either. Within weeks, public order collapses. All over Europe, particularly in Germany, refugees set out in search of water. Hydrologist Julius Denner and data analyst Elsa Forsberg warned the authorities early on. They were ignored and silenced. As more and more people die of dehydration and poisoning, the plot thickens, and these two protagonists join forces with the police to understand and stop the radical activism of an eco-action group funded by Russian oligarchs. That's where it gets weird. Suspense and tension in the 42 Grad are introduced and maintained. Sorry, I think I left that out. Throughout the novel by indications of temperatures rising in every chapter. Published in 2020, Impact opens with harrowing contemporaneous scenes from Ogoniland in the Niger Delta, where hydrocarbon pollution takes a ghastly human toll and has been doing so for decades. The main protagonist, Virgile Solal, a special forces soldier in charge of a humanitarian evacuation, is present in this opening scene as a witness. In the following chapter, we see him returning to France to be present for the birth of his first child, a poignant moment with new life and hope, in strong contrast to the previous setting of destruction and despair. But his child lives for only a few seconds, her lungs critically impaired by cement plant pollution. This incident sets Solal on the course of action to attain justice for the countless silent victims of anthropogenic climate change. Rather than vengeance, he is motivated by the need for urgent change. The narrative resumes with a socially mediated kidnapping of the CEO of Total Energies, France. Solal has become the leader of a militant group known as Green War. Due to his direct and transparent discourse and the fact that the ransom demanded will not serve any purpose other than an urgent action plan to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, Solal obtains the public support ahead of his trial for murder and terrorism. The global publicity that the trial and the arguments around climate change action attracts turns out to be the primary objective of his actions. This novel stands as a radical manifesto for climate change action, constructed like a patchwork, with a fictional narrative of Solal's past, the death of his child, the kidnappings, investigation, hunt, trial, and post-sentencing conclusion, interspersed with short quasi-journalistic narratives entitled Nouvelles du Monde, or News from the World, that range from extreme flooding in India, with crocodiles attacking people inside their semi-flooded homes, to small communities in the Arctic desperately hunting seals to feed the polar bears that would otherwise become a real threat, oxygen bars in Delhi, and hailstones the size of tennis balls killing pedestrians in the Loire region. The sheer number of these postings and their extreme and often bizarre content contribute to the sense of a pervasive, unstoppable, and intensifying threat. The narrative of each fragment, introduced in media res, has its own protagonists, its own suspense and tension, and fits into the complexity of climate change while displaying within each of these fragments elements of interdependency, non-linearity, tipping points, and critical transitions. These dispatches are not fictional. At the end of the novel, Norek lists them along with their sources, which are either from reports, newspapers, or interviews. He does not, however, simply include the facts as a factual report. Each is given a different human perspective and a unique voice that make the experiences more direct and relatable without diminishing the factual accuracy. In other words, the author's imagination, pathos, and linguistic sensibility become strategies harnessed to bring the reader closer to an intimate understanding of the events while still retaining the facts. Bringing the consequences of climate change home to the reader is essential to secure awareness and possibly action. Everybody knows that the boat is leaking, as Leonard Cohen sang, but few are getting their hands dirty to fix the leak or even actively looking for a lifeboat. Why? Impact addresses two of the main reasons for inactivity directly. Firstly, the consequences of anthropogenic climate change are alarming but progressive, and while the changes are observed, many life forms adapt as well as they can, and humans specifically are quick to superficially adapt their environment, more often than not increasing greenhouse emissions in the process. Impact also names another aspect that allows effective climate change action to be delayed and which is not often encountered, probably because it may be interpreted as offensive. Personne ne semble prêt à se défaire ni de son confort, ni de ses habitudes. Tant que le choix sera laissé, l'option du moins contraignant gagnera. La démocratie et le libre arbitre sont des notions merveilleuses, mais au sujet de l'écologie, il est grand temps de s'en rendre digne au risque d'en être privé. Pourtant, dès aujourd'hui, on ne peut pas laisser aux consommateurs la possibilité de décider entre des fruits de saison ou des fraises venues du bout du monde, de décider entre un trajet intérieur en avion ou un trajet en train. Il faut malheureusement choisir pour lui prendre la main. Il faut des lois d'obligation pour les citoyens et pour les grandes entreprises. Et je le répète, ce n'est qu'avec elles que nous provoquerons un vrai changement. Clearly, NOREC exposes the lack of decisive actions in ways that do more than justify Virgile Solal's activism. They also prepare a platform for the legal instruments required to make a difference, taking into account human attachment to comfort and resistance to change. Persuasion is, of course, key to securing adherence. NOREC introduces an effective narrative strategy to drive persuasive discourse in the shape of the two officials charged with negotiating with Solal, police captain Nathan Modis and criminal psychologist Diane Meyer. Modis is a model police officer, professional, organized, direct, reasonable, sensitive, well-informed, honest, a good and patient listener. Diane Meyer is highly trained, intelligent, intuitive, modest, empathetic, and also vulnerable, suffering from several phobias. In the course of their discussions with Solal, as well as their investigation into his past and motives, both these professionals, who represent distinct personality types, are progressively persuaded by Solal's arguments. Modis is also a father, and his discussion with his teenage daughter about Solal, Green War, and the issues at stake provide an opportunity to develop youth perspectives on climate change. This is an important point. Along with the other difficulties mentioned, climate change action is impeded by the fact that neither the consequences nor the possible mitigating effects of climate change action will make an immediate difference to the generations that have the power to make a change today. This implies the need for self-transcendence and the will to benefit not oneself, but future life on the planet. Impact, through the careful development of these secondary characters, allows readers who do not spontaneously identify with Solal to align with other characters on which his words and action have an impact. One of the traditional possibilities for the start of a crime fiction novel is the scene of the crime and the first encounter with a dead victim. Only later, upon reflection, do we realize that the opening scene of Impact, in the desolation that follows a particularly bad oil spill in the Niger Delta, mimics this structure. Les poissons crèvent. Ce qui sort de la terre est déjà presque mort et l'eau des puits est empoisonnée par les métaux lourds. L'air est tellement pollué qu'il provoque des pluies acides qui trouent les toits en tôle et transforment la roche en poussière. Vous pouvez imaginer ce qu'elles font sur leur peau. Le delta est un des premiers endroits au monde où la vie a tout simplement disparu. Pas d'enterrement digne, pas question de revenir plus tard, des corps qui brûlaient, la colonne noire qui s'éleva dans le ciel s'apercevait à des kilomètres de distance. Né dans le pétrole, nourri au pétrole, mort à cause du pétrole, brûlé par le pétrole. With these images in mind, it is impossible not to relativize Solal's crime of kidnapping the CEO of Total Energies France a few chapters later. Identifying with Solal's action is further facilitated by quotations in the text that refer to authentic documents and real interviews with the real CEO of Total Energies, Patrick Bouillet. This interrogation of what crime is, with the purpose of revealing the real crime, is by no means new in crime fiction. Crimes that result from reprisals by vigilantes or avengers are frequently presented as a parallel or even an alternative to formal justice. Examples range from Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express to Moussa Konate Hawk on Nesser, the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan, or the thought-provoking novel Toit by Afrikaans author Piet Steyn. Plots that implicate vigilante justice often point to deficient legal, normative, or demonstrative legitimacy of the state, a perceived gap between law and order, or between law and justice. Such a reversal necessarily describes an upheaval of the established order. The reader remains an observer of the drama that unfolds, or is invited to empathize with a vigilante criminal in their role of victim and avenger. A direct consequence of this reassessment or reconsideration of the nature of the crime and the true identity of the criminal is in the presence in novels like Impact and 42 Grad of parallel investigations. On the one hand, a scientific investigation to establish the origins and consequences of the ecological crime, and on the other hand, a police investigation to determine the identity and motives of the eco-defender. In this way, scientific data and dense factual content are introduced into the narratives. Both these novels manage the encyclopedic nature of this massive input creatively by chunking the content, interspersing scientific information with action, news reports, dialogue, various social interactions, parliamentary debates in the case of 42 Grad, and legal proceedings in the case of Impact. Criminal investigation in crime fiction is about problem solving. Where the crime has been committed, the investigator has to establish who the guilty party is and accumulate evidence, often based on questions surrounding motive and means. In intrigues where the identity of the criminal is known from the start, the investigation is about the hunt, following clues, avoiding traps and false trails, and establishing an evidentiary trail. In the case of predicted or serial crimes, tension is created around the urgency to prevent the crime or further crimes of being committed. This creates difficulties for the author of a realistic, current-day climate change crime novel. How does it end? During his trial for kidnapping, sequestration, and murder, Solal's lawyers make use of several strategies to plead his case. They start with the foundation of an organized legal system, claiming that the individual accepts to relinquish his right to defend himself and exact justice for injury on the condition that the legal system will take charge and that justice will be the same for all. Following this, they argue that Solal would not have taken the law into his own hands if the legal system had acquitted itself of this cardinal responsibility, citing an article from the French Penal Code that allows for the public prosecutor to bring to court any acts of willful injury, even though charges may not have been filed by a victim. This allows them to introduce a plea of legitimate self-defense, invoking a gap in the French Penal Code to identify what they call ecocide as a crime. Si l'on considère Si l'on considère maintenant l'humanité comme une seule et même victime, I'm going to translate as I go along, as a sole victim and the planet as a scene of a unique crime, then these big businesses, by their co-action, are all culpable of repeated homicides altogether. They help one another and get rich from the same poison that they, so rich that they think that they are immune thanks to their fortunes. Consequently, there's a causal link through their general complicity. Whether it's a crime to continue with activities that contribute to anthropogenic climate change is no longer a rhetorical question. Around the world, several cases that appeal for justice against environmental destruction have been brought to court. In March 2023, the European Court for Human Rights heard a case from a Swiss association and its members, a group of elderly women campaigning against the consequences of global warming on their living conditions and health. Jurisdiction was relinquished to the Grand Chamber, and judgment was handed down on 9 April this year. The court ruled that a state's failure to take actions to mitigate climate change breached Article 8, the right to private and family life, and Article 6.1, the right to fair trial of the Convention. This ruling is sure to set a precedent regarding the state's responsibility to take action. The handling of key issues such as admissibility, standing, and causation may pave the way for more efficient regulations. It seems inevitable that these claims will increase as the consequences of anthropogenic climate change become more radical and more direct in their impact. To conclude, returning to Fred Vargas's obsession with the need to inform in order to make a difference in popular responsiveness, what could best serve this purpose? An interpretation of scientific documents in a language that everyone can understand, as Vargas tried to do, or fiction as a largely untapped resource that can introduce serious topics into readers' consciousness? More specifically, can literature contribute in any way to increase awareness or to secure adherence to climate change actions and policies? Or may it, on the contrary, reinforce a sense of helplessness and paralyzing resignation? Reading about climate change is not a pleasant distraction. In crime fiction novels, a sincere truth-seeking investigation mostly leads to the apprehension of the criminal, or at least a revelation of the motives that led to the crime. The sense of closure, understanding, and even just retribution this affords the reader, is one of the main attractions of this genre. Climate change narratives cannot have such a clear solution. They are narratively displeasing, as my son Matthias says. Even though the activities of big business and the complicity of political powers may be identified as criminal with knowledge, recklessness, or negligence, they are only a part of the complex history behind anthropogenic climate change, which implicates the majority of human beings over a score of generations. In this regard, there's a clear difference between novels like Impact, on the one hand, and Yrsa Sigurðardóttir, The Day is Dark, where climate change is simply a catalyst for a different crime. Or even Antti Tuomainen's novel, The Healer, in which the presentation of a country, supposedly in the advanced stage of climate-induced societal collapse, compares far too closely to the everyday reality of South Africa to be foreboding. Impact, for all its efforts to present a comforting therapeutic ending, is gripping and convincing, filling the reader with unease, unsettledness, and perhaps even fear. There is a name for this. The American Psychology Association describes eco-anxiety as the chronic fear of environmental cataclysm that comes from observing the seemingly irrevocable impact of climate change and the associated concern for one's future and that of next generations. The APA therefore considers that the internalization of the great environmental problems that affect our planet can have serious psychological consequences in some people. Olivier Noreck feels strongly about the need for action. The tight and stripped style of Impact betrays urgency. But if this urge is translated into literature, it has to be done responsibly. In an interview, Noreck speaks about the problem of over-information. He maintains that an author has to earn the right to write about important issues by doing in-depth research in contact with professional specialists. His concern is transmitted in Impact through the narrative, although the narrative contains enough action to carry the well-researched factual documentation. Noreck is also adamant about not being a collapsologist, and the end of the novel, albeit a little utopian, allows enough hope for the average reader to feel that appropriate action may make a positive difference. In that sense, I do think this kind of novel does have the potential to stimulate critical thinking and encourage responsive action, that it recognizes human accountability for our tenure on Earth. As for me, I adhere to Romain Rolland's opinion that we need to associate pessimism of thought with optimism of will. We are sometimes disappointed by reality, but this should not lead us to abdicate, since we are inhabited by the potential to transcend our physical limitations. In the end, the world, that is the planet, will do just fine at 60 degrees or 80 degrees or 100 degrees, even if humans, through anthropogenic climate change, may ensure their own demise and that of other vulnerable forms of life on Earth. In my darkest hours, I am comforted by Julian Barnes's conclusion in Nothing to be Frightened of. We shall not die out in 6 billion years. Something far beyond us, or at any rate far different from us, will die out. So much for that pathetic murmur of "I was here too." There is no two, as there will be nothing to which or to whom we can recognizably appeal, nothing that in turn will recognize us. Perhaps those future life forms will have retained and adapted intelligence and will view us as primitive organisms of curious habit and faint historico-biological interest. Or perhaps they will be life forms of small intelligence but great physical adaptability. Imagine them munching away on the surface of the earth while all the evidence of Homo sapiens' brief existence slumbers in the fossil record below. Oops. And just to thank you for your attention. I'm so sorry about my collapse. I am also not a collapsologist, but I apologize for that. And thank you.
Testing. Thank you. Colleagues, I think we need to say, let's give a big applause to our professor. Baie geluk. Dean Tony Leysens, Registrar Ronel Retief, Vice Deans, staff, students of Stellenbosch and other campuses, alumni, emeritus colleagues, societal partners, guests, friends and family, husband and children of colleague Catherine. Colleague Catherine, my mandate is a very nice one. I have to hand the certificate to you. You are a full professor of French at Stellenbosch University, and we could hear it tonight. Colleagues, the staff and students of Stellenbosch University, and especially our professors, are driven and guided by values like the so-called e-care values of Stellenbosch University. E-care is the acronym on the one hand for excellence, that we strive to optimally live up to our own calling and purpose in terms of our specific potentialities and opportunities. That we strive to practice a sound work ethic, that we function with determination, dedication, and discipline. The second value is compassion, that we live with concern and with care for others, with sympathy, feeling with others, with empathy, feeling ourselves into the skins of others, and with interpathy, feeling across cultural and life view boundaries ourselves into the position of others. And also interpathy means we think ourselves into the skins of those from different backgrounds. Then accountability is the A, that we strive to give account, live responsibly, answer to the challenges of our time and of future times. And that we also continuously give account of our decisions and choices, our actions and practices. And we do this in the knowledge that where there's accountability and transparency, there truth and truthfulness, trust and trustworthiness flourish. And then the R is respect, that we put the spectacles on again, look again, think again, listen again, and thereby, by listening again, think again, recognize the dignity and worth, the value, the esteem, the honor of other people, and of nature, and of plants, and of planets. That we consider consistently whether our actions advance dignity for all in personal and professional life, in public and planetary life. And then equity, acquired us from the Latin, that we seek equilibrium in a town like Stellenbosch, in a country like South Africa with our big divides, that we strive for equities. Situation where some don't have too much and others too little. But equity also as avoiding extremes, as the attempt to live with, in Afrikaans, ewewig, level-headedness, level-heartedness, level-handedness. Equity also has the capacity to embrace complexity in all its forms, as we have seen here tonight. Embrace plurality and ambiguity, ambivalence and duality, paradoxality, and strangely also the tragedy of the reality in which we live. Prof. Catherine, your person and your work reflect these values. Your inaugural tonight provides for us a window into how your deep theoretical reflections in language and literature constitute a tool to transform and renew and heal human and natural society. You provide impulses and insights for discourse on justice and also the three dimensions of rights. Civil and political rights, firstly, but also socio-economic, and especially tonight, the third dimension, ecological and environmental rights. I got so excited and energized here listening to you because you give us the energy, the enthusiasm, insights that we can further draw upon. You started your lecture with a concern that you had when you decided to go from law to studying French, that I might become too theoretical whilst Rome is burning. But I must tell you, Immanuel Kant said, there's nothing as practical as a good theory. And tonight we could see how your deep, deep theoretical reflections have practical impact. So you made the right choice many years ago. Catherine, we honor you and we look forward to keep on journeying with you with excitement and energy. I gladly hand the certificate.
Honored audience, it is my honor to speak the vote of thanks tonight. As the chairperson of the Department of Modern Foreign Languages, I would like to express our department's appreciation to our rectorate members, Professor Nico Koopman, Dr. Ronel Retief for attending this evening, our Dean, Professor Anthony Lysons, and our Vice Deans, Professor Vasti Root and Professor Lindy Heineken. Thank you for your generous support in making this evening possible. I would also like to specifically welcome Katrine's family, friends, colleagues, and partners in person and online. Dear Katrine, To make it a little easier for you to listen and to enjoy what I'm going to say now at the end of this evening, I would like to indicate to you that my vote of thanks is going to be about 10 minutes. I think, especially for the last speaker of an evening, it is important for the audience to know how long it's going to take. As a department, it is a privilege to have someone of your stature and academic caliber in our rows. My warmest congratulations on the official inauguration as full professor at Stellenbosch University and on this inspiring inaugural lecture with which you gave us a brilliant insight into your current research activities. I have decided not to list all your merits and achievements as an academic scholar and researcher tonight. They are truly impressive. The Dean has mentioned a couple of them. A couple of them are also on the program. They're truly impressive and can be easily looked up online. Instead, I would like to limit myself to a few personal thoughts that I believe are essential to your merits as an honorable member of our department and the entire university. Climate change is one of the greatest challenges, if not the greatest challenge of our time. We all have to, or I should probably say, would have to drastically change our lives in order to somehow save this planet. Human-induced climate change is threatening the basis of life and the future of the human species as a whole. And although we can see its catastrophic effects on an almost daily basis, we are still doing far too little to effectively counteract its progression. Well, it seems to be part of human nature that we repeatedly close our eyes to the long-term consequences of our own actions. And against our better judgment, we often just continue with what we are used to. We humans are often simply too comfortable to face inconvenient truths and leave our comfort zones. However, dear Catherine, the temptations of comfort and convenience, let alone luxury, do not seem so desirable to you. I only fully realized that when I visited you once in your hermitage high up on the mountain. At the time, I had taken the supposed convenience of approaching your house on the long, winding mountain road in my car rather than walking. Before you had casually described this road to me as not in the best condition. The truth is that this road, with its countless gigantic potholes, the likes of which I had never seen before anywhere else, is not really manageable for an ordinary car. It certainly wasn't for my car, which I had to take straight to the garage for repairs after my first and so far only visit to your home on top of the mountain. When I traveled up the road, it seemed unbelievable to me that you took this road almost every day to reach the worldly realm of our faculty in a 25-year-old Toyota Corolla. Now, since you gave up your post as chairperson of the Department of Modern Foreign Languages, after many years of service in which you greatly shaped this department, you have started your well-deserved sabbatical this year. You have therefore not only been relieved from a great deal of administrative duties, but also from the inconvenience to take this daring obstacle course from and to your house every day. However, contrary to what I would have assumed, you did not embark on a secluded recherche du temps perdu. Instead of reading Proust, you decided to dedicate your newly found time to researching the treatment of climate change in literature. As we were able to see tonight, that this is at times also a rather uncomfortable and even depressing endeavor. Over time, however, I have discovered that your mysterious fascination with the uncomfortable has a specific reason. It seems to me that it is an uncompromising demand for the things that lie beyond the ordinary. They must work harder. This is one of the slogans for which you are not only notorious among your students, but which also clearly earns you their respect. I have come to realize that your high standards as an academic leader are based on the simple but by no means banal fact that you care. You deeply care about the existence and future of this institution, but above all, you care of the students that have been entrusted to you as learners, as members of this society, as human beings. And you care about the pressing social, political, and ecological issues of our present time and the state of the world in which we all live. Therefore, you are concerned about the extent to which people often fall short of their true potential in their usual tendency towards convenience. Your credo is that only those who are willing to leave their comfort zone and are prepared for lifelong learning and growth will be able to unfold their talents fully and bring them to fruition. The firm belief in the ability to improve ourselves as human beings is also a central figure of thought in Enlightenment and humanism. The German philosopher Immanuel Kant optimistically described the project of enlightenment as the possibility of man's emergence from his self-imposed knowledge. Kant encourages us to use our critical intellect to engage with the world. And courage is necessary because critical thinking requires us to leave the uncomfortable, convenient paths of thought, to venture fearlessly into uncharted territory. This territory may challenge us with numerous potholes, and we may not know where this unknown path will take us, but there is a chance that it will lead us to a lofty place on a mountain that can open up entirely new perspectives. Dear Catherine, I have come to know you as a fearless and critical thinker and colleague who is prepared to give her students 3 gifts of great value in a humanistic sense. The first gift is the fearlessness of critical thinking that you teach your students in order to help them grow into mature and responsible members of our society to bring about positive change. But for a humanist, being truly human also means allowing oneself to be touched and transformed by the aesthetic power of art. The famous sonnet Torso of an Archaic Apollo by the German poet Rainer Maria Rilke speaks of this in a mysterious way. According to Rilke, the beauty of art has a revolutionary potential which lies in its ability to touch and to transform us in an existential way. According to Rilke, the timeless, radiant beauty of great art can confront us with an idea of our higher human self and ignite in us the spark to strive for that higher self. It seems to me that you too are sincerely convinced of the enlightening and transformative power of art. And in view of the global catastrophe of climate change, are we not all called upon to radically change ourselves and our lives? That is why for you, engaging with literature is not a comfortable escapism or an end in itself, which could seem downright negligent to other people in view of the current state of our world. Rather, I believe that you are convinced that engaging with literature is a social necessity, perhaps more so today than ever before. The fact that you convey both the beauty and the social urgency of great literature to your students is, in my opinion, the second gift that you give your students. Literature is not only an expression of man's sense of possibility, as Robert Musil would say, it also confronts us with the limitations and the fragility of our existence. However, it seems no coincidence to me that you also critically touched on the limits or limitations of literature in your lecture tonight. After all, in view of the climate crisis, it is ultimately a question of survival whether we as humanity succeed in venturing out of our comfort zone and taking the step from aesthetic pleasure to action. And therein lies the third and perhaps most valuable gift that you are willing to give your students. The conviction that it is not only necessary, but also possible and enjoyable to draw concrete moral consequences from our encounter with art and especially literature. Consequences that can then result in a change of our social, political, and ecological contexts. In view of the climate catastrophe, it seems essential to me that we allow ourselves to be transformed and radically change our lives, not only so that we ourselves can become fully human in the humanistic sense, but also so that we as society can start to take more responsible action and thus preserve our humanity. Dear Katrin, many students and colleagues at this institution, and in particular our department, are indebted to you in countless ways. I have tried to express, at least partially, what I believe to be your unique gift as an academic leader. I myself would finally like to thank you sincerely for your collegiality, your critical fearlessness, your receptivity to beauty, your inspiring energy, and your warm-hearted generosity. Above all, however, I would like to thank you for your unwavering vision of a humanistic education that essentially contributes to the department's and the university's objectives. So let me simply conclude in short. Thank you, Katrin, for your humanity and that you care, which I believe is one of your greatest gifts to your university community. It now falls to me to sincerely thank you all for attending this evening of celebration with Katrin, our faculty, and our university. This event could also not have been planned and executed without the invaluable contribution of Liesel van Kervel from the Dean's Office, Liselle Engelbrecht, our administrative officer at the department, Amira Brown and Cindy Arenze from the marketing team, and last but not least, Justin Alberts from the communications team. We now invite you all present to join us for light refreshments in the foyer. And now I ask that you please rise for the academic procession as Katrin leads the procession.